Welcome to part two of Your Brain in Middle School. I'm excited to bring this to you and talk about some of the other changes that happen in your brain during adolescence. This is the exciting part where we talk about how much you can learn during middle school. So let's talk about the good news. In our last section, we talked about how your brain is a lot like a race car flying at 200 miles an hour towards a brick wall. And unfortunately, as you haven't fully developed yet, you have less of a capacity to brake before hitting that wall. Well, now let's talk about the good news. The good news is that your brain has a lot of gray matter going on right now. And the nice part about gray matter is that that's where all of your brains or most of your brain's neuron cells are formed. Um, the other great part about this is that you have so much gray matter that can make these connections to information and ideas and things that you're learning right now. And eventually, that gray matter will connect with the white matter in your brain. The white matter is a lot like what some of the things that we've talked about already that form the majority or the meatier pieces of your brain. And so we're again, the fact that your gray matter is at the highest percentage during adolescence means that you have such a high capacity to learn. The other interesting part about this is that your brain is also very sensitive at this point. And that's why it's really important to take care of your brain and to not introduce chemicals or hard impacts to your brain because it is so sensitive. So it's really important to be thoughtful of that and know that that's how your brain is functioning at this point. All right. So the key about the gray matter is that that's where these neurological cells are. And your neurological cells connect with one another to form neurons. And that's how learning happens. The ways that you are able to connect new ideas to old ideas and to strengthen those pathways so that they become quicker, they fire quicker, and you are able to make those connections faster. You can see this happen through your language development. As you are developing language and hearing it and practicing new words and using new words, and the more that you practice those words in that language, that those pathways become so much stronger, and they form as you look at this, by different cells or neurological cells connecting to one another and forming these sort of the synapses that travel from neurological cell to neurological cell or neuron to neuron. And so it's really important to recognize how that happens. And again, as those pathways become used more and more often, they become stronger and stronger. The other thing that happens as they get used more and more often is they get a stronger protective sheath around it, known as the myelin sheath. And that makes those connections happen faster and faster. We'll talk more about the process of myelination in a little bit. But the important thing to know is that the more you practice something, the stronger that connection gets and the more ingrained that learning becomes. So again, when your parents or your coaches or your teachers really reinforce to you the importance of practicing and reviewing and going back over material, there's a reason for that. And it's really about recognizing how your brain works and how learning is created. So practice truly does make perfect in this case. Same with the idea, I'm sure you've heard it before, that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Now, it's certainly more difficult to change learning patterns as they've become more ingrained. And again, as you have the greatest potential to learn right now, it's important that you practice good habits, healthy habits, and ways that are going to support your learning, because it's much harder to change those routines and that learning later. The reason that we can learn new things is a process known as neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to grow and change. And this is most pronounced during adolescence because it's connected to the amount of gray matter that you have. You are truly building bridges between different parts of your brain so that they can work together to do the increasingly complex tasks that you are being asked to do, whether those be in school or in sports or in the way you interact with one another. All of those things are connected to your learning. And the idea of neuroplasticity means that you have a great deal of flexibility and really the ability to shape the things that you are doing and the ways that you will move, that you will go forward in your life. This is also such a huge time of identity development. And so that's another piece of this. As you try out different identities and sort of flex and move into different identities, you can really change who you are during this time. And that's a very normal process to go through. So really be thoughtful of the fact that if you don't want to get stuck in a mindset that thinks you can't do something, because now is the time when you can, and you should try to learn new things. And the reason, and again, another really important piece of this neuroplasticity is the idea that you either use these pathways or you lose these pathways through a process known as pruning. And literally, it's similar to pruning a tree. As you develop these new neural pathways in your brain between different parts of your brain, new information and old information, or even new information and new information, as you practice and review those new ideas, those pathways get stronger and stronger. Now, at the same time, your brain also removes any unused neurons or neural pathways through this process known as pruning. So you might be thinking to yourself, and I know that it's happened to me before. When I was in school, I took calculus. And I learned calculus and I did well in calculus and I actually enjoyed calculus. And when I was in calculus, I knew how to do calculus very well, much easier than I would right now. But since then, I haven't practiced calculus. I haven't taken classes. I haven't done homework. I haven't used those that skill as much as I did back when I was in that class, for example. And so those pathways are not as strong. And if somebody put a calculus problem in front of me right now, I would probably be able to figure it out eventually, but it would definitely take some time. And those connections would definitely not be as sharp. And so it's important that thinking about the ways in which practicing something and staying current with that practice reinforces your brain's ability to recall that information and use it in a meaningful way. Now, I mentioned myelination before. And again, that's the strengthening of the connections between two neurons. Basically, the strengthening of your learning of information and skills. That myelination and this process of pruning happens during periods of deep, or REM, which stands for rapid eye movement, sleep. And we will be talking about the importance of sleep during adolescence. And this is probably one of the most important reasons to get good, deep sleep each night. One, your body's growing so fast that you need it. But two, the reinforcing of the learning that you do during the school day and over time gets much stronger when you get very deep sleep. So it's so important to be getting good sleep through adolescence. Don't forget that, and we'll be reminding you about it often. This other idea is called the power of yet, and it's very important that you keep or build a growth mindset during this period of adolescence, because that mindset aligns with your brain's current ability to grow, change, learn, and adapt. Truly, anything is possible, but you have to believe it in order to make that happen. And you have to believe it in order to prioritize trying new things, believing you can learn new ideas, and then committing to the practice it takes to become to really reinforce those new neural pathways. So the idea of yet, you might not be good at something right now, but if you keep working at it and learning and practicing, you will get better. So always remember that you might not be good at it yet, and that there is still opportunities for you to grow. Now I'd like you to listen to Professor Carol Dweck on the power of yet and the growth mindset.
The power of yet. I heard about a high school in Chicago where students had to pass a certain number of courses to graduate, and if they didn't pass a course, they got the grade not yet. And I thought that was fantastic, because if you get a failing grade, you think, I'm nothing, I'm nowhere. But if you get the grade not yet, you understand that you're on a learning curve. It gives you a path into the future. Not yet also gave me insight into a critical event early in my career, a real turning point. I wanted to see how children coped with challenge and difficulty. So I gave 10-year-olds problems that were slightly too hard for them. Some of them reacted in a shockingly positive way. They said things like, I love a challenge, or, I was hoping this would be informative. They understood that their abilities could be developed. They had what I call a growth mindset. But other students felt it was tragic, catastrophic. From their more fixed mindset perspective, their intelligence had been up for judgment, and they failed. Instead of luxuriating in the power of yet, they were gripped in the tyranny of now. So what do they do next? I'll tell you what they do next. In one study, they told us they would probably cheat the next time instead of studying more if they failed a test. In another study, after a failure, they looked for someone who did worse than they did so they could feel really good about themselves. And in study after study, they have run from difficulty. Scientists measured the electrical activity from the brain as students confronted an error. On the left, you see the fixed mindset students. There's hardly any activity. They run from the error. They don't engage with it. But on the right, you have the students with the growth mindset, the idea that abilities can be developed. They engage deeply. Their brain is on fire with yet. They engage deeply. They process the error. They learn from it, and they correct it.
What a powerful mindset to have. And be sure that you always remember the power of yet. So that brings us to the end of part 2 of our Your Brain in Middle School series. What I'd like you to do is to find your response assignment on Google Classroom and then answer the following critical thinking question. What is something that you want to get better at? Something that you are not good at yet? And what steps will you take to improve on that area? What I'd like you to think about is see if you can add in ideas from the lecture that you just watched to your response. So, what steps that you just learned about will you take to improve in that area? Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you soon.